Yeah, to me, Judas Priest, I guess the greatest run of pure objective genius in all of music is that Judas Priest run from Sad Wings to Hellbent for Leather.
Martin Popoff is a Canadian music journalist, critic, and author renowned for his extensive work on heavy metal and hard rock. Often dubbed the world's most famous heavy metal journalist, he's penned over 115 books covering various genres, including progressive rock and punk. Popoff co-founded and served as editor-in-chief of Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, Canada's premier metal magazine, which ran from 1994 to 2009. Raised in Trail, British Columbia, Popoff's passion for heavy music was ignited in the early 70s through bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. He earned a BA in English from the University of Victoria and an MBA in marketing from McMaster University. Some of Popoff's books: Riff Kills Man, 25 Years of Recorded Hard Rock and Heavy Metal from 1993. It was a combination of almost 2,000 album reviews, and then that work kind of evolved into the acclaimed Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal series, which spans thousands of reviews across multiple volumes. His bibliography also includes in-depth band biographies like Doom Let Loose on Black Sabbath, Light Beyond the Black on Dio, and Contents Under Pressure, which was about Rush. Popoff has also contributed to a lot of documentaries with banger films, including Rush, Beyond the Lighted Stage, and Metal Evolution. And today we're talking to him about Judas Priest, album by album. You had mentioned that the second great metal album was a Judas Priest album.
Yeah, so my treatise there, I mean, I won't go through the whole thing, but I've actually written a book called Who Invented Heavy Metal, which is 120,000 words, and it ends in 1971. So I've looked at that whole birth of metal in granular form, right? So to me, to net it out, I think the real true birth of metal, and I always talk about intentionality of actually making a full album, and that's why on our Contrarians YouTube channel, I've started a new Who Invented Heavy Metal series, and it's an album-based series, right? So anyways, so the point is, to me, metal starts, properly with Black Sabbath, but we get Black Sabbath, we get Black Sabbath Paranoid, we get Uriah Heep, Very Heavy, Very Humble, we get Deep Purple in Rock, okay? So that's 1970. And to my mind, you get these things fixed in your mind, and then this ossifies, and that's the way you think forever. But to my mind, from there through 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, we're just getting similar or better versions of something that was already established in 1970. And then when I heard Sad Wings of Destiny for the first time as a new release in 1976, it felt like this was the first band that has really kicked it up a notch, like a new style of singing, better riffs than Black Sabbath. Weirdly, a baby band with no budget on a small label, right? Happened to be from Birmingham. Happened to have been going as long as Black Sabbath, actually. They started in 1969, believe it or not, first album in 74. But that album was just full of really smart, interesting, complicated, almost progressive metal ideas. So that was kind of the start of not even really a new kind of music. It's just like the next great album, right? And then at that time we got Rainbow and More Thin Lizzy and UFO and we're moving along, Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, blah blah blah, new wave of British heavy metal. To me, the next actual true invention of anything. And I like to say that so Metallica invents thrash July 25th, 1983 with Kill 'Em All. But I also like to say, and a lot of young people kind of agree with this and think along these terms, that's the invention of metal versus heavy metal, right? So that's the start of metal, because at that point, now you're going to see death metal and black metal and all that, and moving on and metalcore and everything. So yeah, to me, Judas Priest, I guess the other point around that Sad Wings of Destiny sort of clip is that I've always said this, and this I also believe, that the greatest run of pure objective genius in all of music, I don't know my jazz, but in all of rock, I will put this up against U2, Bob Dylan, all your most critically acclaimed bands. I think the most genius run in all of rock is that Judas Priest run from Sad Wings to Hellbent for Leather, tied with Queen 1 to Queen Jazz. and that's it. There's no other like these guys are just operating on just a way higher level. Everything's smarter about everything they're doing for a big run of albums in a row. So yeah, that's kind of that big important 76 sort of period for Priest. 76. So 76, 77, 78, 78. You get 4 albums in those 3 years.
What brought me to this band with Priest was the riffs. I remember going, I could not escape a riff that was so catchy as this. And I ended up liking the band in spite of myself, and guitar riffs that were like undeniable to me. I'm going, I can't not like this.
Yeah. Yeah, they were complicated, interesting. And Sin After Sin, you got Simon Phillips on drums, so it's almost like jazzy progressive metal. I always say Rush invented progressive metal, but if you want to go down the more metal end rather than the progressive end, Judas Priest was very, very progressive at that time as well. And Stained Class is completely scientific and weirdly thinly trebly recording, and yeah, just riff after riff is just smarter than every riff. Forget about American bands. Like they can't even, they're like drawing with crayons compared to these to Priest. But even like I say, even better than Rainbow, even better than Black Sabbath. They're just and again, that new style of singer, this very technical operatic sort of singing. Nobody had ever done that before. So that was a new thing as well. And yeah, and even just the strangely sort of timeless lyrics. I always joke that Sad Wings of Destiny, all the lyrics on there could have been written in the 1400s, and the most modern song on it is The Ripper, which is 150 years old. Right. The story from that. I mean, and everything else can be literally timeless. It's just, there's no cars, there's no fax machines, there's no, nothing like that. There's no mention of the internet or, so that's funny as well. So it had this sort of timeless, epic sort of quality that you didn't get too many places.
Well, Sad Wings, were they really that poor when they did that album?
Oh, heck yeah. They were poor 3-4 albums forward. They were poor all the way up until really the live album Semi broke, and then British Steel broke. I mean, they had no money. Their deal even with CBS, they would spend all that money. You go on tour. They were a small band. They were a cult band. A lot of metalheads. I mean, all the people who would start thrash bands and stuff just loved the hell out of this band. They were literally, by far the smartest, coolest heavy metal band, but they were still a cult band. But at Sad Wings, they're just on their second album. They're still with Gull Records. They have no money at all. And really, it's not until 79 they start making any money.
There's certain groups, there's a mentality, there's a certain camaraderie in every genre, and metal certainly has a. What did you find about metal fans?
Yeah, I think it's a very scholarly sort of thing. I remember when the internet first started, and I know when it started. It was really 1996 is exactly when it sort of started being actually used by people, right? But I remember for those first few years, people used to say, "Wow, there's a lot of people talking about heavy metal all over this new internet thing, right?" And so it was really like that. And prog people are really scholarly like that as well, and that's why people joke about Rush fans, because it's prog and metal. They're the most scholarly of everybody. You go to the Rush conventions and stuff, and everybody's pretty wealthy and got good jobs, and they're really smart and all that kind of thing, right? so yeah, metal fans love the whole history and charting that whole thing. I've seen a few debates. I haven't gone way into it, but I know there's a certain thing, like how in hip hop, for example, people pay very little attention to the past, and things move super fast. And it's really been compressed down to song by song by song. So there's different cultures, the way, people embrace their music genres. But yeah, the metal fandom is super deep. You got to know your history. You got to know all the different names of the genres and all that stuff, and who's in the bands and everything. It's a pretty music snobbery kind of field, I think.
Sin After Sin, Simon, what happened with? I talked to Simon, and a lot of fans gave me hell. You didn't ask about him playing with Priest, and I'm going, how did that happen?
Yeah, so they're losing their drummer, and they just had to get someone, and they get Simon in there, who's young. I don't know. What have I heard? 18 years old, maybe 18, 20 years old or something. But Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and it's a bit of a question, like who is driving what, how much influence did he have on them? But they were already, doing these menza mad, fast sort of riffs and being very complicated with what they're doing. But for some reason, him in conjunction with his sort of jazzy style and this pretty out of character production quality Roger Glover gets at the time. Again, it was very thin and high minded and conceptual, almost what he was doing production wise, because he didn't sound like that with Nazareth. Or what are we 77, so that's really it, just Nazareth. He wasn't ever producing Deep Purple yet, but Nazareth's very conservative, normal meat and potatoes recordings, right? So yeah, for whatever reason that came out very jazzy. He plays a little bit like a jazz fusion version of a Bill Ward, I suppose. And then he just they asked him, I think, to stay on and be their drummer and stuff. And he had some other stuff planned, and he had to just go off and do his thing. Maybe he wasn't particularly a metalhead or wasn't super driven, but it's really funny though how this is the to the merit of the heavy metal genre. I often say, like, I have this whole thing, talking about how people love heavy metal, they just don't know it, and that's why people in the Beatles and fans of the Beatles get excited by Helter Skelter. That's why people get excited by Mark Knopfler turning on a distortion pedal for the opening riff of Money for Nothing or whatever it's called, right? That's why Heart Barracuda is their most famous song, right? But people like Simon and people like Viv Campbell, when it comes to Dio versus Def Leppard and stuff, and a few other guys who have been on metal albums, it's like, because metal people are so scholarly, when Simon Phillips goes to his grave, one of the main things he's going to remembered for is just drumming on a stupid Judas Priest album, right? It's totally true. And Viv Campbell is always going to be remembered, no matter how much fame and fortune he has with Def Leppard. He's always going to be remembered as that guy in Dio. So that happens a lot out there, I think.
Dissonant Aggressor. A lot of people talk about the double drums and going that sort of opened the door for something else. Tell me about that tune.
Yeah, so that's an important tune. We know Slayer covered it later, but yeah, double bass drums is that's got a whole history coming forward, how it creeps into things through jazz, through a little bit of Ginger Baker, but not in a big way really anywhere until Priest kind of picks it up. They've got that. They've got Exciter. You think of Pat Travers' Hammerhead with Tommy Aldridge. So there's little bits of it coming along, but yeah, it becomes a signature part of metal later on in thrash. But other than that, it's just like a super crushing, just well written, and it does have these sort of it is one of the coolest places to hear the style of Simon Phillips. It's got this sort of slanting cool use of toms. It's very jazzy what he does on top of it as well, but yes, and double bass, yeah, super important. But like I say, those four albums in a row at least, and I always include Hellbent for Leather because I like that as much as well. And that's the point where you start seeing this new extra element of heavy metal where Priest gets credit for being the band that puts it all together in a package in terms of the looks of the album covers and everything they're wearing and the leather and studs and everything, and going into interviews and sticking up for heavy metal, because before that, it's generally speaking, you didn't want to align yourself with the genre, or probably any genre, really, frankly. And I've always said that before Priest, Black Sabbath looked like the Eagles. They all looked the same sort of thing, right? They all just looked like hippies, right? So that's the point. Into the Live album, Unleashed in the East and British Steel, that's where you get this actual first championing of metal.
There's that thing that happens, I think, that you go from high school, and then, you high school, you have a limited budget to buy records, obviously. And, you either got to take the girlfriend out or whatever, or you've got different priorities. You get out of high school, you think you have more money because all of a sudden you're paying rent. And that's that different thing. From 1980 for me, British Steel, like I was out of high school and all of a sudden everyone was playing. I remember going, oh, wow, there's a big step upward here because, Breaking the Law was on the radio, was hearing that over and over again. Tell me about that record for the band.
Well, this is so, I've written a bunch of books on the whole new wave of British heavy metal thing too. And if you were a metalhead, this was a beautiful time for you because you would go to Spokane, Washington, or whatever, or Vancouver, or Seattle, or you would buy imports, and there was more metal than you knew what to do with. Finally, because previous, if you were a metalhead, it didn't break your budget. It's like your budget matched how many heavy metal albums there were out, and there weren't that many, right? But at this point, so they're not a new wave of British heavy metal band because they come from a previous generation, but they are in there representing it with that big title, British Steel, and that razor blade, and the blood and stuff, right? And but it was I remember hearing that for the first time, and we were all very disappointed because it was them dumbing down. I always call it the Judas Priest Kiss album. This is when Judas Priest becomes mere mortals again, right? They're not gods anymore. They aren't magicians anymore. They're just like a really good heavy metal band, like a bunch of other, people who are making heavy metal, right? But yeah, they sawed off all the edges. They got a new, very simplified drummer, and the production's very, very conservative and stuff. But yeah, it was big. And so there were these old school bands coming along with all the new pups doing well at the same time. So now Scorpions is doing well. Now Black Sabbath is doing well with Ronnie James Dio in the band. Judas Priest is doing well. Ozzy's got a new band. AC/DC's doing amazing with Back in Black. So this was a beautiful time for metal. And I think it really all starts with the new wave of British heavy metal, bringing up a bunch of these smaller bands, most who never did all that great, but all the metalheads loved them. Your Tigers of Pantangs and Saxons and Motorheads, Angel Witch, Quartz, Fist, all those bands, Witchfinder General. But at the same time, because there was this new love of metal, the old guard were all finally doing well too. And because they were already on a higher level, now they're gold and platinum acts and playing all the hockey barns and stuff. So that 80 through to 83 period is where you get lots and lots of metal. And then 83, there's a new shift. There is thrash, but there's also hair metal. And then the old guard still keeps going. But yeah, for us as kids, and I would have been 17 in 80. And for us at that time, Sounds Magazine, Kerrang, and all that, it was just a great time to be a metalhead.
When you started writing this stuff, because this is about you now, didn't you not find this is the most arduous task in the world? Did you know what you were getting into? Because when you're starting to write, you're taking all these little pieces all over the place. You've got to make some semblance of like it's got to flow like a movie. How do you do that? And do you have people to do it for?
No, I don't have people working for me. I mean, I have to do it all myself. I've had people over the years say, "Oh, let's collaborate on a book," and it just never seems to get off the ground.
Is it because you have a system and it works?
Okay, so I would say out of the 130 books, I would say half of them are band biographies, right? So that is a whole different kettle of fish than any other kind of book. And so the system there is that, I generally, for those, have never thought to write a book on a band until I've talked to them at least 20 times, 25 times. So you got all these interviews and you're slotting stuff into place and you're putting chapters and stuff. And to get even a little more granular, I mean, on the biographies, I will write chapters and I will write about every song. So after a while, I realized a good way to put up a skeleton of a chapter is I'll just put like intro, recording, album cover, song 1, song 2, song 3, song 4 at the end, wrap up, reviews, concert, like live. And then I'd put that in 24 point, and then I'd start slotting stuff in. So it's good to have, I guess the general thing, it's good to have some sort of an organizational system so you don't just feel overwhelmed. It's like, oh, where do I start kind of thing, right? But then, I've done all these like these album by album books is a whole different idea. The illustrated histories is I've done a whole pile of timeline and quotes books and timeline books just on their own, like visual biographies. I've done 3 books where I've written little analyses or reviews of every single song by a band. So I did that for The Clash, The Damned, and Led Zeppelin. Haven't done any others besides that. But yeah, so there's many different kinds of books. I guess the other thing I would say as a piece of advice is once you get started, don't let long gaps of time happen between, because you gotta stay remembering what you just talked about and stuff. I mean, in the early days, I ran the risk sometimes of taking large chunks of a quote and using it and then not really chopping it, but copying it. So now it's still sitting in some other file, and I might use it again on page 250 when I used it already on page 25, right? So just little things like that, right? So yeah, I create chop files of things. So again, to be a little granular, like say if I'm doing a biography, I will take my transcript of someone's interview, right? I will save it and then put in the title the file name chop, and then I will just now this is the double, right? And then I will just take quotes out and reduce it until it's down to nothing. So I've known I've used everything. I haven't used everything twice. I know what I haven't used because it's the chop file, right? So it's that interview minus as I'm moving things over to the book, right? And then all of a sudden I've got this empty interview file. So I go, okay, now I've used all my stuff from this, right? So yeah, there's various little tricks to the trade.